Prior to that, though, I think that the celebrations were also muted because of a scary, scary incident that happened on track and involved Pierre Gasly with a tractor or a crane that was actually on the track trying to remove something, but maybe was out there unknown to the FIA. And Pierre Gasly had really brushed with fate or death. It was so unbelievably close. Obviously, the conditions, as we mentioned, were terrible at that point in time when the race had just started because it was so rainy. So visibility was an issue. Just take us through kind of the sequence of events there, Nate, and what's going to happen next. And if the FIA is actually investigating why that crane was on track at that time.
Yeah, so the sequence of events is an important thing when you look at F1 incidents like this, because even when you look at the Jules Bianchi crash, so for people listening who aren't aware exactly how that went down, Jules Bianchi spun off the track in Suzuka in 2014 under a safety car, went head on into a recovery vehicle, exactly the same thing that was on track on Sunday. And there was about 5-6 things that happened in the lead up to that on their own probably wouldn't have led to anything, but when you put them all together, rain, the placement of the circuit, the fact that Bianchi and all the drivers at the time weren't, at that point there was no virtual safety car, so that's what prompted the virtual safety car to come in. This Gasly one's exactly the same. Sainz spun off on lap 1, bit of chaos on that first lap, which was actually which is why wet races are so good, because you get that kind of chaos at the beginning. Safety car comes out, and Gasly was one of the guys caught up in that instance, so he pits quite early because he had basically half of an advertisement hoarding stuck on the front of his car, which was a great image to see. He pits, and then one of the things that I think was alarming from this was the fact that even though the safety cars picked up the rest of the pack, and these are horrible conditions, it's raining, and the images you see on the TV cameras are always so misleading because it looks like they have great visibility, but that camera is kind of hoisted up above the cockpit. The drivers have so little visibility compared to that, and even on those images you couldn't really see the crane until quite late. No. What Gasly starts doing then is he's driving fast to catch up with the pack, which isn't unusual. People do that usually. If you're a bit back. Problem was this recovery vehicle for Sainz's car had not just come onto the side of the road; it was right on the side of the racing line, and all the other cars in front of Gasly went past this under the safety car, and a bunch of them said, "I can't believe there's a tractor there. I didn't see it." They were going slowly. And what was so scary for them was the reason Sainz had gone off there. He just aquaplaned off the circuit. He hadn't, he wasn't. It wasn't like he'd gone too fast or whatever. The conditions there were such that you could easily lose the car, and once you start aquaplaning, you can't stop where you're sliding. And then Gasly comes past at much faster speed, and luckily, he said afterwards, I was about 2 meters away from being killed. And you see the replay, and it's terrifying, isn't it? Because it passes right to his left, on his left hand side, and. He said the same thing. He said he couldn't slam the brakes on because of the conditions. He had to ease up and just hope that his car kept control. So there's a lot of things here that you kind of have to unpack immediately. Gasly got a time penalty and a penalty points afterwards for going too fast, which he admitted afterwards he was in the conditions. And a lot of people said, "Oh, the FIA is blaming Gasly," and that wasn't quite the case. He shouldn't have been driving at that speed. There was safety car signs, but also the red flags had just come out just before he came to that point. However, what's also true as well is that there's never any justifiable reason that a recovery vehicle should be on the track there, especially as the conditions were what they were. The drivers weren't aware that was the case. And even if they had been, they'd have all been saying, we'll get, especially at Suzuka in the conditions, the same conditions or similar conditions to where Bianchi's accident happened. You'd have thought of all places, this would have been where there'd been some common sense. And what's interesting as well is that I think the FIA are now doing a thorough investigation into this, but I think that the biggest question is it has to be who's to be held accountable for this, because in the regulations it clearly states the only reason a vehicle can go on track like that is with the permission of race control and the race director. So either there's one of two things that's happened here. Either Eduardo Freitas, who was the race director for this race, has said go on the racetrack in those conditions, or there's some confusion somehow, or the marshals have put the truck on the track in the way they did. I don't think that the latter sounds quite unlikely, just because these are trained marshals. They know what the rules are. They wouldn't do something without express permission from the FIA. So it's another moment where a race director in F1 is under real scrutiny, I think, for a decision made. And look, we talked kind of over and over again about what happened with Michael Massey last year. But this is a much different one. I think that, again, if he has made that decision, he's not put it out there thinking, oh, this will, this is risky, whatever. But it's just not taking into account human factors and the fact that clearly in that situation, and Gasly made the point after, he said, I could have died for the sake of 1 minute. And what he meant by that was the race director by that point knew it was a safety car, but also he knew that it was likely going to be a red flag. So it's like, why are you putting the tractor on the track, knowing the drivers are going to be in the pits very soon? And that's not like Sainz was out of his car. He didn't need to be extracted from it. It's not like you have to get that out. So Gasly said, and we're so lucky. Christian Horner said F1 got lucky, and he was so right. And it would have been, it's still a horrible thing that happened. But just imagine if God forbid something bad had happened. For what it was, it would have just been, you wouldn't have been able to believe that it had gone down. So F1 got away with one, but a huge kind of safety issue going forward.
I'm curious, everything's recorded, obviously, in communications with the drivers and their teams.
Yeah.
In the control room for FIA and the race director, is all of that communication recorded with marshals? So I'm just wondering, can they go back and was there miscommunication? Marshals didn't quite understand when they needed to go out, or, did he not realize where Gasly was on the track? And I know he's got so much that he's managing all at the same time and so many decisions that are coming at him quickly. He's almost like an air traffic controller. And I know that job is so ungodly stressful. I'm just wondering, did something slip through the cracks where he didn't quite realize where Pierre was at that moment in time, or if there was just some kind of miscommunication between the two? And if that is in fact recorded and will be easy to figure out.
Yeah, all of those things will be easily accessible. And I think one of the things that it's a really interesting point that you make, because one of the reasons when Massey was replaced by Freitas and Wittich, who were the two guys that came in after him, the idea was we're going to take the stress of this job away from one person. A guy called Herbie Blash came in to help. He used to work with Charlie Whiting, who was the revered race director before Massey, and Whiting's sudden death a few years ago basically brought Massey, kind of elevated into the job probably before he was kind of ready for that role.
Okay.
Good to know. So Blash has been brought back in to kind of help there. But if that is the case, if he's made decisions and the situation's got away from him, then again you've got to say, well, those changes that you made to the FIA race director structure haven't worked. I think one thing that I do sometimes wonder is it's such a formulaic thing, the FIA, and sometimes for good reason. Sometimes it comes across really badly. But in those situations, the FIA they'll follow the procedure to the letter. It's okay, a car's gone off, yellow flags or safety car, and then it's like, okay, recovery vehicle, let's go get it. If you think a few races back, when Ricciardo stopped during the Italian Grand Prix, a recovery vehicle came back onto the track there, and one of the reasons that the race finished under red flag was the fact that the recovery vehicle actually couldn't get Ricciardo's car off of the circuit in time. We had that silly situation where the race just finished under the safety car. So it seems like maybe they've followed the procedure to the letter. And I think if you take all the humanity out of that position, if you think, again, like I said, with Suzuka, the emotion of that circuit and just the knowledge of, okay, it's raining, let's make sure nothing goes out on the racetrack until all these guys are back in the garage, or they're the other side of the circuit. We'll bunch them up behind the safety car. Because one thing people forget about the safety car is it's not just a case of let's stop the race and restart it. One of the reasons you put everyone behind the safety car is you put all the cars in one part of the racetrack, and then marshals the other end of the circuit say, right, we've got a minute before the cars come back. We can work on the car. And people sometimes overlook that that's actually one of the reasons behind the safety car. So I don't know. I think that it just seems they were trying to do everything to the letter, but in a time order that they were acting like they didn't have the time they did have. They had so much time and they kind of went through it. But without seeing that report, I couldn't say for sure. But I think that's one of the things that needs to come out of the report was it just a case of somebody following something, too closely to the rule book? And if that is the case, I think the race directors need to be able to say, okay, well, we need some common sense is needed in this situation. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. The FIA are effectively investigating their own race director again. So we'll see what comes out of it, because it's not always the best look, is it, when a governing body is like, right, we're going to investigate, and the guy who made the decision is probably a guy who works for us. But sorry, well, not probably, is a guy who works for us. So we'll see what comes out of that. And the FIA's track record with these things, people weren't happy with the way the Massey investigation came out and stuff. So we'll see what happens. But they need to be brutally honest with themselves, because I don't want to compare the two things, but if Massey made a mistake in the heat of the moment last year, but this could have cost a driver their life, which to me is way more important than a championship and a trophy or whatever.
Absolutely.
This is on a different level. So they need to be brutally honest with the facts and just lay them out as they happen.
Yeah. Never should have happened, but certainly so thankful that Pierre Gasly is okay. And we'll obviously wait for the findings of that investigation.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.